For most of human history, the answer to the question, "What's for dinner?" was never simple. There was no field behind the house, no sack of grain in the corner, no animals penned nearby, waiting to be milked or slaughtered. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived by reading the world like a map. A patch of berries here, a herd of gazelle moving across the valley, roots hidden beneath dry soil, fish gathering at a bend in the river. Survival meant movement, memory, cooperation, and luck. Then at some point, something changed. Somewhere in the ancient world, a person looked at a wild grass and did something so ordinary that it almost disappears from history. They saved seeds. They placed them in the ground. They came back later. And when the plants grew, they began one of the most important transformations our species has ever experienced. But when did the first farmers actually appear? The simple answer is around 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, in a region we now call the Fertile Crescent, stretching across parts of the modern Middle East. Archaeologists place the first clear signs of plant cultivation and domestication in this broad region beginning around 11,700 years ago, just as the planet was warming and the old Ice Age world was fading away. But the real answer is more interesting than a date, because farming did not begin like a light switching on. It began like a habit. Imagine standing in a valley in the ancient Levant, long before cities, before writing, before kings, before metal tools. The hills are greener than the deserts we imagine today. Wild barley and wheat ripple in the wind. Gazelles move in the distance. Pistachio and almond trees dot the landscape. People here are still hunter-gatherers, but not the wandering caricature we often picture. Some groups are settling for longer periods. They are building stone houses. They are burying their dead near home. They are grinding wild seeds into flour. These people are often associated with the Natufian culture, which flourished before full agriculture, roughly from about 15,000 to 11,700 years ago. They were not farmers in the complete sense, but they were doing something remarkable. They were living in a world where the line between gathering and farming was beginning to blur. Think about that for a moment. Farming may not have started because someone invented it in a flash of genius. It may have started because people were already deeply familiar with plants. They knew which grasses produced the fattest seeds. They knew when they ripened. They knew which patches came back year after year. They knew that disturbed soil could produce more growth. They knew that seeds dropped near camp sometimes sprouted. At first, nobody had to say, "We are farmers now." They were simply helping useful plants grow. And this is one of the strangest things about the first farmers. For a long time, they probably did not look very different from hunter-gatherers. They still hunted. They still gathered wild food. They still moved when they needed to. But slowly, over generations, their relationship with certain plants became more intense. Wild wheat and barley have a clever survival trick. When their seeds ripen, the seed heads naturally shatter, scattering grain onto the ground. That is great for the plant, but annoying for a human trying to harvest it. If you swing a sickle through wild grain, many seeds fall before you can collect them. But every now and then, a mutation appears. A plant holds onto its seeds instead of dropping them. In the wild, that plant is at a disadvantage. Its seeds do not spread as easily, but in a human field, it is perfect. People harvest it, save it, plant it, and without realizing it, they begin changing the species. This is domestication. Not just humans shaping plants, but plants quietly reshaping humans. The first farmers were not simply growing food. They were entering into a bargain with wheat, barley, lentils, peas, goats, sheep, and eventually cattle and pigs. Humans protected these species, moved them, watered them, cleared land for them, and carried them across continents. In return, these species fed humans in numbers the old foraging world could rarely support. But the bargain came with a cost. A hunter-gatherer might eat dozens, even hundreds of different foods across the year. Early farmers often depended heavily on a few crops. A bad season could mean hunger. Farming demanded repetitive labor, digging, sowing, weeding, harvesting, grinding. Grain did not leap into the bowl. It had to be cut, carried, threshed, winnowed, stored, and crushed between stones until hands, knees, and backs ached. So why do it? This is one of the great mysteries. For a long time, people imagined farming as obvious progress. Of course, humans became farmers. Farming means more food, stable villages, civilization. But archaeology complicates that picture. Early farming could be harder than foraging. It could make diets narrower. It could spread disease because people lived close together, often with animals. It could create inequality because stored food could be controlled, stolen, taxed, or inherited. So farming was not simply better, it was different. And in some situations, it became almost impossible to resist. At the end of the Ice Age, the climate changed dramatically. The world warmed. Ice sheets retreated, sea levels rose. Rainfall patterns shifted. In the Fertile Crescent, wild cereals were abundant in some places, and human populations may have grown around them. When people begin settling near rich food sources, they have children, build memories into a place, and become attached to the dead buried nearby. Moving away becomes harder. Now imagine a dry century. The wild stands of grain shrink. The gazelles move elsewhere. More people are living in the same landscape. Suddenly, scattering seeds near camp, clearing competing plants, or protecting a patch from animals is not just convenient. It is survival. Farming may have grown out of pressure, opportunity, and memory all tangled together. By around 10,000 to 9,000 years ago, agriculture in parts of Southwest Asia had become much more recognizable. People were cultivating cereals like einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, and barley, along with legumes such as lentils, peas, chickpeas, and bitter vetch. They were also domesticating animals including sheep and goats, which became crucial partners in the new farming world. And once this way of life took hold, it spread, but not like an idea floating gently on the wind. It spread through people, marriages, migrations, exchanged seeds, copied techniques, and sometimes through pressure on neighboring hunter-gatherers. Farming moved into Anatolia, then Europe. It moved across the Iranian plateau and into South Asia. It transformed villages into larger settlements. It made storage more important. It made land more important. It changed what counted as wealth. Before farming, wealth might be knowledge, relationships, tools, ornaments, or access to hunting grounds. After farming, wealth could be grain in a storehouse, a herd of goats, a field inherited from a parent, a wall, a boundary. That is a massive shift in human imagination, because farming changes time. Hunter-gatherers certainly plan for the future, but farmers live inside a calendar. The year becomes a machine of seasons. There is a time to sow, a time to weed, a time to harvest, a time to store, a time to pray the rains come again. A seed planted today is a promise made to a future self. That might be one of farming's deepest psychological effects. It trained humans to build life around delayed reward. You do the work now, you eat later. And that simple equation helped create villages, granaries, temples, armies, taxes, writing systems, and states. But here's the part many people miss. The first farmers did not appear only once. The Fertile Crescent was one of the earliest and most influential centers of agriculture, but farming also developed independently in other parts of the world. In China, people domesticated rice and millet. In New Guinea, people cultivated crops in the highlands. In Mesoamerica, people transformed wild teosinte into maize, one of the most dramatic domestication stories in history. In the Andes, people domesticated potatoes and other crops, along with animals like llamas and alpacas. Agriculture was not a single invention. It was a pattern that different humans discovered in different landscapes. That tells us something profound. Farming was not inevitable in one exact place, but it became possible wherever humans had the right combination of plants, animals, climate, population pressure, and accumulated knowledge. Still, the first farmers of the Fertile Crescent hold a special place because their experiment led to some of the earliest known farming villages, and eventually to the rise of cities in Mesopotamia. But we should not imagine them as people thinking about civilization. They were not trying to invent the future. They were trying to get through the next season. Picture one of them, a woman perhaps, kneeling in soil, darkened by recent rain. Around her, children chase each other between mud brick houses. Smoke rises from hearths. A dog watches from the shade. Somewhere nearby, men and women return with bundles of reeds, hunted meat, or gathered nuts. In her hand are seeds from plants her family has eaten for generations. She presses them into the earth. To her, this may not feel revolutionary. It may feel practical, but buried in that gesture is the future of the human world. The first fields were probably small. Nothing like the endless industrial farms we know today. They may have looked more like managed patches, gardens of useful grasses and legumes near settlements. Early farmers were experimenters, though they would never have used that word. Every season gave feedback. Seeds from this patch grow better. Grain from that slope ripens earlier. Goats with calmer temperaments are easier to keep. Certain plants survive when planted near water. Certain soils remember last year's ashes. Generation after generation, humans learned by doing. And the plants learned too, in their own evolutionary way. The grains became larger. Seed heads became tougher. Animals became smaller, more manageable, more dependent. The wild became domestic, but never completely obedient. Even today, every farmer knows that nature is not conquered. It is negotiated with. This is why the question, when did the first farmers appear, is so powerful. It sounds like we are asking for a moment in time, but we are really asking when humans changed their relationship with the living world. The first farmers appeared when people stopped only taking what nature offered and began trying to guide what nature would offer next. They appeared when landscapes became projects, when certain plants were no longer just wild food, but family inheritance, when animals were no longer only prey, but property, companions, and walking stores of meat, milk, hides, and status. And perhaps most importantly, they appeared when humans began to stay. Staying changes everything. When you stay, you build stronger houses. You accumulate things. You store food. You have more children. You defend land. You remember exactly where your grandparents are buried. The place becomes part of you. But staying also traps you. If the harvest fails, you cannot simply become a carefree wanderer again. Your life is tied to fields, walls, animals, neighbors, obligations. Farming creates security, but it also creates dependence. That contradiction is at the heart of human civilization. The first farmers gave us bread, villages, and eventually cities, but they also gave us long workdays, social inequality, organized conflict, and the possibility of famine on a scale hunter-gatherers rarely experienced. They opened a door, and once humanity walked through it, there was no going back. By about 12,000 years ago, the first steps had begun. By 10,000 years ago, farming communities were spreading and deepening their commitment to domesticated life. By 8,000 years ago, agriculture had already transformed large regions of the Old World. And over the following millennia, independent farming traditions in Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Oceania would reshape the rest of the planet. So when did the first farmers appear? They appeared at the edge of the Ice Age around 12,000 years ago, in a warming world full of risk and possibility. But in another sense, they appeared slowly, one choice at a time. The first farmer may not have known they were a farmer. They may have simply noticed that seeds grow where they fall. They may have returned to a favorite patch of grain and wondered whether it could be made better. They may have saved the biggest seeds without understanding genetics. They may have fenced young animals without imagining herds. They may have planted for their children, not for history. And yet, from those quiet experiments came the world we live in now. Every loaf of bread, every bowl of rice, every city skyline, every border drawn across farmland, every harvest festival, every supermarket aisle, every morning cup of coffee sweetened by crops grown far away. All of it traces back to that ancient turning point, a hand in the soil, a seed pressed into the ground, a family waiting for rain. The first farmers appeared when humans began to believe that tomorrow's food could be created today.